But let's move into the conversation. The first question is for both of you, and that is in this particular moment of American civic life, what does PACE represent to you? Or said another way, what does PACE offer to this moment in American civic life that someone might be hard pressed to find anywhere else?
Okay. Well, what really struck me throughout the process of getting to know Pace, and especially over the last couple of days, is how special an environment this is because Pace has created a safe space for funders and practitioners from very different ideological orientations with different approaches and models to the work that they do, representing wide swaths of the American geography to really have difficult and honest conversations about democracy. And I do think that that is really unique to be able to have these kinds of questions as people who are invested in renewing democracy and civic life in the United States. How do we do so in a way that doesn't conflate our work with politics and drive further political polarization? How do we make sure that we are attending to the short-term risks while engaging on the medium to long-term needs? And I just really appreciate, I think, the honesty and intentionality of everyone in this room and who's part of this network. And I think a real desire to not swing wildly from one end of the spectrum to another, to not panic, although clearly there is an urgent need to invest in our democracy and civic life, and to really be committed to working together on a basis of evidence and pragmatism to renew democracy and civic life in the United States. And I really do think that's rare indeed in a world of hot takes and what are we going to do now and impatience for results. And I think that's really going to redound to the benefit of American democracy. And I think it's really special.
I'm so glad that all of that came through and that you can see that already, because I think one of the things that makes space so unique and that we have really worked hard to make unique about PACE is that it's not just about what we do, it's about how we do it and with whom. And that's a really intentional mantra that we have built over time. We focus on the destination and where we're going and what we want to happen. And it matters how we get there.
Right.
And it matters who we're with on the journey. And so I think that's something that's really special about PACE and what it is that we've tried to create here as the container for all of that work to happen. I also think one of the things that we've heard members tell us that I'm really proud of is that PACE is a place that a lot of other places, a lot of other gatherings we go, that they come in and they feel like the answer has been decided and the whole gathering is to get people on the same page towards that answer, towards that solution, towards the correct, right, clear way to go. And so it's really about that some other spaces can really be about persuasion and not necessarily about understanding. They can be about certainty and not necessarily about sense making. And so we've tried to really create a space, and I really credit our board for this, and particularly the board member that I would credit as being most responsible for hiring me, which is John Dedrick from the Kettering Foundation. Thank you, John. And because John and I talked a lot at the beginning about how we wanted PACE to be a space that we didn't lead with answers, but we led with questions. And John Esterly, who was also, he was on the PACE board until he literally was like, Kristen, you have to let me go. It was like 12 years or something like that. Like we set aside the bylaws to re-elect him to the board so many times, so many beyond term limits. But he always talked about that a lot too, about the right question. It's not about having the right answer. It's about having the right question and engaging in the conversation in ways that are about curiosity and humility and community, and not about certainty or rightness or authority.
Yeah, I talked to someone yesterday who said, I'm not leaving with answers, I'm leaving with questions. And it was that space where it was like, is that okay that we leave with questions? But then they went on to say, but I'm leaving with a sense of ownership over those questions.
I love that.
Because we're all surrounded by the questions, but do we feel a sense of ownership? Like it's responsible. I'm responsible to help answer that question
Right.
for my team, my board, my project, my organization.
Right. That makes me want to tell another quick story. Because it's just so characteristically Pace, and it just jumped into my head about something that John Gruber said once. And in case you can't tell, there's something about Pace and the name John. John Dedrick, John Easterly, John Stewart was on the board for a while, John Gruber. I'm actually married to a man named John. I don't know what it is, but it's a problem. But John Gruber, one time when we were going through our strategic plan, we were meeting our strategic plan review process. We had a meeting in it was Detroit, and we did this like World Cafe style conversation with members. And so people, every station in the World Cafe had a different question of like, who do we want to be, for whom, what do we value, what do we, all of those types of questions. And John Gruber, who was the board chair at the time, he was reporting out on it, and he said, well, we asked you some questions, and you, because it's Pace, you answered with more questions. So we have all of the questions, and we will work together to get to not the answers, but some answers. And so it's just really part of the spirit here.
I want to pick up on the togetherness because it is really incredible to be a part of a community and feel that solidarity in terms of the questions that people are grappling with. And I think like that's what's been so revitalizing of the last couple of days. It's like you can get very much in your own head and feel really alienated and alone and trying to think through some of those questions, and having a space where people can come together and talk through them has been really renewing, I think, into the togetherness in the community. Even if we didn't resolve all the questions, knowing that other people have those same questions and that there's a space where we can work through them has provided me at least with a lot of reassurance.
So Kristen, 10 years, right? 10 years at Pace? 10 short years. I'm curious, what are you most proud of? But also, when you think about the future, like what are some things that are still on the field? Like, and what I mean is, you obviously gave your all. Nobody would say no that you haven't done that. But like, that doesn't mean there aren't lingering challenges and issues in the field, like that. Maybe 6 months, a year from now, you might say, "Gosh, I wish we just could have done more." And Pace is still around, we're still working. But what are those issues and challenges maybe that Pace is still going to have to navigate, still going to have to grapple with? So sort of a two-pronged, most proud of what we still need to grapple with.
It's really hard because there are so many things. I'm proud of the staff. I'm proud of everybody who does work here and who has ever worked here. I'm proud of our members. I'm proud of our board. I'm proud of everything that we have left on the field. I'm really proud of the permission structure for experimentation that we have created here. It kind of goes back to the like not being too authoritative, not being prescriptive, directive, but to just the permission to try some things and say, we don't yet know. Let's see how we can figure out together. And I think the absolute, my favorite, okay, this is where it feels like a trick question, Kevin. It's like you've asked me, you have 4 children, and if I asked you to choose your favorite child,
There is one.
They don't cut that out.
So I kind of feel like I'm being asked to pick my favorite child right now, but there is one. And it's our Faith in and Democracy initiative, which is really, thank you, which is really close to my heart for a lot of reasons. As a person of faith, as a Christian, I do the work that I do as a reflection of my faith. Full stop. It is my it is how I want to be in the world and how I want to love God through the world is through the work that I do. So that is why it's so close to my heart. And I actually got my start in this space through faith-based volunteerism. My AmeriCorps year back in redacted a number of years ago.
2012.
Exactly right before I came here. It was okay. I'm gonna have to say it. It was 2005 because it was when Hurricane Katrina happened. It was right before Hurricane Katrina happened, actually, that I joined AmeriCorps. And the first big project, and it was specifically an assignment to work with faith communities to help them engage volunteers and their congregants in volunteerism. And Hurricane Katrina happened, and the first big project that I got to work on was we received. I worked at Points of Light. My service year was at Points of Light, and we received a $1 million grant to help faith communities respond to Hurricane Katrina using volunteerism and to use volunteers to build the capacity of those communities to respond to disasters that would happen in the future. And so that faith-based work, and that was my first foray into philanthropy, was I got to design that grant program, and we gave $1 million to 33 volunteer centers along the Gulf Coast for those purposes. So that was it was a real like return to my roots to take on that program. But that program was not about me. That's just what was personal to me about it. But what I really loved about that program and why I think it stands out as my favorite is, so for anybody who doesn't know, it was a pooled funding and learning initiative to explore the ways that people of faith and communities of faith were bringing people together, especially at a time that we felt like the dominant narrative, particularly unfortunately within philanthropy, was that faith and religion was a problem to be solved for in democracy.
Right.
And we wanted to prove that that wasn't true, or that there is truth to that, and that the worst of religion is not the whole of religion, and that there was other work and other stories happening. And so, in partnership with what ended up being 7 PACE member institutions, we re-granted, and I'm just now realizing the parallel, just over $1 million to 33 organizations. I have the chills right now because I just made that connection that it's about the same amount of money to the same number of organizations as my AmeriCorps year. Um, and they were organizations that are working to use faith to call people into their better angels, to build civic character, to build civic infrastructure. And I think it ignited a different type of conversation about the value of faith in democracy and to democracy. And so I loved the mechanics of the program. I also loved the program, and then I promise I'll stop talking. I also loved the program, not only what it meant for me and what it meant for what it was, but for what it ended up meaning to PACE. We started that initiative in 2019. Careful observers will note that our strategic plan to become a philanthropic laboratory was created in 2020. So that program actually, which was a total experiment in and of itself, that program gave us the proof points and gave us the confidence to embrace experimentation, not as something that we did through one program, but that we could do through the entire strategy of our organization. It really, I think, changed the way that we started to operate and really made experimentation an important part of what we do. So that was a really long answer to only one part of your question. Are you sure you want me to keep going?
We're gonna move on.
Fine. This is really helpful to me though.
Yeah.
Like there's
seriously.
background knowledge.
Yes. So Shannon, I've told like 87 people that I'm gonna ask you this question. Because ever since I found out that you were the pick, I couldn't help but notice that you were coming into this space from a different vantage point, from some might say a broader vantage point. So look at your international experience with democracy. So the burning question for me, maybe for some of those in our audience, is how do you see that broader vantage point that you're coming from helping you in this role to innovate, both at pace and in our field?
Great question. So as you may have observed from my bio, I spent 20 plus years working on strengthening democracy, human rights, and governance internationally for the most part. There have definitely been some crossovers with the domestic space, but that work has allowed me to engage in a significant breadth of subsectors within democracy in a lot of different contexts, from democracies that are transitioning and opening to ones that have stagnated to ones that are sliding backwards, and then of course to the most sort of authoritarian, corrupt, and conflict-ridden environments. And then sectorally, I've had the opportunity to work in elections and political processes, strengthening the rule of law, fostering independent media, trying to make democracy deliver. So that was a theme, I think, on day one and day two. And then, really importantly, very recently, in addressing the corrosive impact of money in politics and trying to counter corruption. So, as I've been listening over the past couple of days, I'm like, oh, yeah, we experienced that in Kyrgyz Republic, or like we had programs in Indonesia to address that. So I think there's a lot of learning from that international experience that can be brought to bear in the domestic environment, because in many ways that democracy support ecosystem and programming is about 30 years ahead in a lot of the countries in which I've been working. And as we were talking about in the last session, there is quite a strong evidence base that has been developed over those years. But I wanted to talk about two places in particular where I think there's a real opportunity for innovation borrowing from the international context. And that is number one, work on protecting and expanding civic space, and really nurturing and cultivating civil society. That has really been my life's work. And again, in the international context, we're about 15 years ahead of the US in terms of the tactics and tools that are being used to repress and suppress civil society, from legal, regulatory, and administrative burdens to cyber attacks and digital and online abuse and defamation and hacks, to physical violence and all kinds of harassment and defamation. And civil society and the funders that support them internationally have massively innovated to address those threat vectors. And I'll give you just one example from my current work. When I came into the administration about 4 years ago, we met with a group of journalists who said, we were having the hardest time doing our work because we were being sued for defamation by extremely rich and powerful oligarchs, or by governments. And we just cannot survive if we're having to spend all this time and money trying to address those lawsuits. So we created a pooled insurance fund that would kick in legal defense for those reporters if they got sued. And it's a massive innovation, and is now giving investigative journalists the reassurance they need to do the important work that they do, and know if they get sued for it, that they can fall back on this insurance scheme and not go broke because of the work they do. And the second area that I wanted to mention is encountering violent extremism. So I spent a couple of years during the Obama administration, and then when I transitioned to CSIS, which is in painting, working on countering violent extremism. But the innovation there was really a focus on belonging and a recognition that at the end of the day, human beings wanted to be a part of something that was larger than themselves. So there was a ton of innovation at the time around narratives and connectivity and belonging and hero stories and a lot of the things that we were talking about yesterday. And it has struck me sitting here over the last couple of days, there's so much to borrow from that work in terms of how do we really tell a story that people can aspire to be a part of, that's exciting and invigorating and speaks to that deep longing to be a part of something, and then create the real infrastructure within our communities to create those opportunities for connection and belonging. So hopefully that's helpful. Just giving a little bit of sense of where I'm coming from and how maybe that can translate to this context. I'm so excited.
Yeah. She's 30 years ahead of us, I think. So that's like
But not in
pushing
age.
minority report. Sort of. Not really. Anyway, we'll see that out too. So thank you, Shannon and Kristen, for joining Keeping Pace with Kristen. Thank you everyone.